Hey, what's up? I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. Minhal Baig is here with us. She's got a brand new movie, Hala, coming out. How are you?
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. So this movie was fantastic. I just watched it today, and there's a lot going on here with Hala, and it was a long road for you to create this film. So what's it like to almost have it here for everybody to see?
It feels very surreal because this project has been in process since 2000. In some form or another since 2014.
Wow.
So it's been a while, and there was a short that I made in 2015, sort of a precursor to the feature, and focused in on one of the subplots, and the feature just expands upon the short and really dives into, this young woman's coming of age and her relationship with her family. So it's been a process, and I'm actually really excited for people to finally get a chance to see it.
And there's just a heaviness to it also. And I feel like as a filmmaker with the lighting in the film too, like it's very dark throughout it. And I feel like that was probably intentional. So what were some of the little things along the way that you tried to do to just emote a certain feeling?
Right. So the cinematographer on the project, Carolina Costa, and I worked really hard to ground the world in her psychological perspective and how that sort of changes throughout the movie. She's obviously has a lot of inner turmoil, and we wanted the cinematography to reflect that. A lot of our references, like one of them is like 35 Shots of Rum, which is a Claire Denis movie, and we really took lessons from having practical light sources in the shots, so it felt very grounded and naturalistic, but at the same time there's a moodiness around those scenes, and there's a warmness inside of her house at the beginning of the movie, and it sort of shifts as we're moving into the end when she is in a different home. And so we did a lot of work to make it feel grounded and have the texture of her background as well. Like we had the house in the movies feels very much like the house I grew up in. The school that we shot inside of is the literal high school I went to and attended. Yeah.
Wow. So where was that?
It's a high school called Northside College Prep in Chicago.
That's cool.
So we filmed at my old high school, and so I was imagining some of those locations when I was writing the script, and we ended up being able to shoot there. So it all felt very like grounded, and there's also, it takes place during the fall, which felt very apropos to her being in a state of transition. And Chicago at that time of year is like super colorful and like very rich and saturated in some ways, and we wanted that to also be in the backdrop of the movie.
So why don't we talk about the family situation, because just unpacking all that must have been fascinating, because at first it's like her and her dad have a good thing going, and then without giving it away, things change a little bit later, and her mom have a better relationship.
Right.
So what were some of the challenges in working through those different dynamics?
Well, we wanted to surprise people. Like I really wanted for us to have some kind of expectation of what this family might be like, and then sort of knock those expectations down. She is at a stage in her life where she has a certain view of her parents, and they've kind of been put into boxes. It's that age when young people sort of see their parents as extensions of themselves and not as these complex human beings.
Right.
And I think part of the limitation of that perspective was also in the movie itself in the beginning. Like we want to make sure we stayed in her perspective so that, you get a sense that they are like in sort of the periphery of what she cares about and what she's focusing on. And then as her perspective widens, we include the family more, and we get to understand how her relationship with her mother is challenged because they feel like they're not speaking with each other, they're speaking at each other. And then with her father, it's that she's put him up on a pedestal and has this image of who he is to her based on their connection, a very intellectual connection that they have, and she realizes that he's not the person that she thought that he was. And that is a very life-altering moment when you see your parents as fallible, and that there are things that they don't have the answers to and they are not perfect, and that changes you and how you sort of are finding your own autonomy and your own self identity. It's something that Hala is dealing with at beginning of the movie, and she's obviously evolved her relationship with her mother for sure, but she's also still on the journey of like figuring out who she wants to be and how she wants to present herself to the world.
And where she belongs also, because it's like her culture, her family, it's very restrictive, certainly getting put in a box, but then at school, it's like you don't necessarily have that same freedom. So what is most important for people to understand as she's kind of going through this journey to find who she is?
So there's a couple of layers in the movie. There's the layer of, you know, her navigating her culture, which there's a richness to it for sure. And like obviously her parents immigrated from Pakistan, and there's a definite nostalgia and a longing for a place that they no longer live in. But at the same time, there's some cultural conservatism that is like comes into conflict with how Hala wants to live her life. And then there's the other layer of, you know, the patriarchal forces at work, even inside of the family dynamic. I really wanted it to feel that this family is at times dysfunctional, not because they're Pakistani American or Muslim, it's because they're a family. And all families have some kind of dysfunction in them. Even if it has nothing to do with their specific religious identity or cultural identity, there are complex dynamics at play, and I wanted the movie to feel like this is a coming of age story that just happens to have a young woman who is Pakistani American and Muslim.
Yeah, and also you explore this whole deal with boundaries too, whether it's like the family situation with the teacher. I mean, there's a friend of the father's that comes in there. Like there's a lot of stuff going on with boundaries here. So what were you guys trying to say there when it comes to school situation, family situation, and some other people as well? There's
secrecy, because when you start the movie, you think that Hala is the only character who has a double life, or there's a duality in her identity. And what you realize is that she's not the only one. She's not the only one that is performing or presenting only parts of herself to other people. That is obviously something that her father is also doing. But we're not seeing everything that he's doing because the movie's not from his perspective.
Right.
And so I wanted to sort of bring to light that there are so many things that, you know, first generation or not Muslim or not Pakistani American or not, we're dealing with, you know, secrecy by omission or lying by omission. You're not quite sharing your full self, and compartmentalizing existences so that it's just easier to move about in the world. I know with her father, he is also struggling and has a whole different set of challenges as an immigrant. You know, they're not the same as being first generation, but they are real and legitimate. And you know, part of that is assimilation and contending with whiteness and being adjacent to whiteness. And then with Hala, it's not so much that she's rejecting Western values or rejecting her cultural values for Western values. It's that she's navigating who she is like any other teenager, and it just so happens that some of what she wants is in conflict with what her parents expect of her to be and how they want her to behave.
So when you're in your old high school or you're just working on the film, like, are there things that you're starting to reflect on in your own life? Like, what did you learn about yourself in this whole process?
I learned a lot about being vulnerable and making this movie. When I was making art prior to Hala, it always felt like I was putting it at keeping it at arm's length, because I didn't want to put too much of myself in it, because I didn't feel like the specificity of my experiences would translate to people. And then with this movie, it had to be emotionally honest to who I am and this character and do justice by her story. And the hope was that it would translate. It was an act of, I feel like, an act of processing some of the pain that I dealt with growing up and processing it in a way in this story. And so that was really challenging, and something that I've taken away from this is that I want to approach a lot more of my work in this way, because I feel like it's been very emotionally satisfying to see people resonate with the story who may have nothing in common with this lived experience, but they see something in her story that touches them. And I hope that people watching this movie feel a little less alone in their experiences, if they are Pakistani American or Muslim, whatever background they may be. There is something about Hala's journey that I feel is universal, even though the specificity of it is grounded in my lived experience. Yeah, I think it's awesome that you got to that point. What would you say was the turning point to kind of push you forward and just lay all your cards on the table there? Well, it wasn't easy, but there was this one scene in the movie that kind of became the turning point. It was the scene in which Hala and her mother are talking in the car after they went shopping, and in that scene, you know, when I wrote it, I was very much in Hala's point of view. I felt like, you know, her mother Iram is being very overprotective and very limiting. But then as I kept revising the script and then shot that scene, I finally found myself in Iram's position.
Wow.
And I really understood that there's so much that she's doing for her daughter that goes unnoticed, and she's taken advantage of. And so recognizing that there were things that I had done in my own sort of adolescence, and that were not, in those ways in which I was like not perfect, they were being sort of translated through the movie. And I think that that scene really changed things for me, because I realized like I can present this family as complicated and dynamic, and they don't need to be, you know, her parents don't have to be one thing throughout the whole film, even though it's her coming of age. I think her mother is also going through a parallel story of autonomy, of like searching for her own autonomy, and her father is also going through a self-reckoning as well. And they're all going through that journey simultaneously. And it was really challenging, like finding a way to like include that and make sure that they were multidimensional, even though it is her story.
And going for that when it's scary and you don't know what the next step's going to be. But I think it's really cool because like I look at Hala and she uses her writing to kind of work things out in her own life. And similar to you, like you had to take it from a new perspective to really appreciate what happened in the past. So what was it like to kind of have that duality of you and the character kind of going through this same sort of thing?
Well, I always wanted her to write poetry because I felt, you know, I wanted to give you know, an inside look into her psychology and throughout the movie without having to see her physically writing each time. And so it serves as this voiceover that's not, you know, one-to-one to the events of the movie, but in a non-didactic way explore what she's going through. And when I was growing up, I also wrote poetry, and I was on a slam poetry team.
Nice.
I was the alternate, though. I wasn't put in to actually go to bat, but I was on the bench. And I found it very liberating to use words and to express myself in that way, because I couldn't always be open and honest with my family members, or I couldn't just always just say what was on my mind. I had to find a way to translate it and make it digestible, and in poetry I could find that in a way that was artful.
Were you a skateboarder growing up?
No, I can't skateboard to save my life.
So how did this come into the picture? How did you pepper that in there?
There was this image that I had of a teenage girl skateboarding down a tunnel, through a tunnel, and that image really resonated with me because I felt that the skateboarding was the sort of the external manifestation of that search for autonomy and the search for freedom. And the poetry was more of like the internal process. And if I could find a way to put them together and show that these things are complementary and that they can exist in the same person, we have this character that's quite complex. And that I have found that a lot of those images, as I'm writing, tend to be the things that I keep going back to, is to remind myself like the intentions and what is so powerful about the story is that she is a complicated person. Yeah. She can have a multiplicity of interests and dreams and ideas, and she's not on the surface what you think she will be.
Yeah, another powerful thing is just the exploration of sexuality. Like the way you open the film is obviously a different sort of scene than we've seen in the past, and especially whether it's Pakistani woman or just any woman in general, showing that I feel is really important. So why was it really important for you guys to show certain scenes, whether it was her by herself, her with her friend? Like, why was that such an important thing?
It was, in the writing of that scene, I wanted to sort of emphasize, you know, she is a young woman who is just discovering her sexuality and gaining sexual agency throughout the film. Obviously, she has reservations about her own sexuality because she's a young woman and she's doesn't quite know everything yet, and that if I could watch a movie like this when I was younger, it would have really helped me and helped me feel that I wasn't the only one going through that, and especially for someone like myself and for Hala's character, talking about sex was just not something we did in our home, and so there was so much that was just unspoken. Like, I really wanted to show these scenes because I want to make clear that even young women like Hala have sexual desire. They're not desexualized beings.
Right, and that's okay to have those desires
Yeah,
too.
exactly. And that she's not simply a desexualized being because she's Muslim or because she's Pakistani American. She is someone who's learning that she has this agency. And I didn't want to sanitize any of that. I wanted her to feel very much like a teenage girl, that every young woman at some point or another has to come to understand their own sexuality.
Yeah, no doubt. So we were talking off camera just about the state of TV, streaming, all that. This is the first narrative film on Apple TV Plus. Why was this the right spot as opposed to somewhere more established?
When I was at Sundance with this film, we had interest from multiple buyers, and I sat down with distributors ahead of the festival before we had screened the film. So I had an understanding of who was out there and what they could do roughly for the movie. But when Apple made an offer on this movie and I sat down with them, specifically the head of original film, he really sold me on Apple being committed to pushing this out to a wide audience and giving access to this film to anyone who wanted to watch it. The film is going to be pushed out into over 100 countries, which is massive for a small film like this. Usually movies like this get extremely limited theatrical distribution and then they kind of disappear and they show up on streaming, but there's no marketing, there's no push behind the film for people to discover it. It becomes kind of this underrated, someone will call it like an underrated independent film that they discovered on Netflix or Amazon or various streaming services. And in this case, Apple was really committed to pushing it out and giving it the attention that it needed. For small movies, it's just a precarious position. There's so many movies out there, and they intimately understood the story and that it would have a cross-cultural appeal, and that even though the story is very specific to this young woman, there is a universal appeal, and they wanted to make sure they supported that. And that really sold me, even though I did not know what the platform would look like or what else would be on their slate. It felt like creatively they were the right partner. Yeah,
that's a big deal. It must have been a big deal to have it at Sundance, and you've obviously taken it all over.
It was really fun, yeah.
What are some of the best memories that you have, whether it's Sundance or just some of the other spots you've been to?
One of my favorite screenings was in Sicily. We took it to Taormina Film Festival, and it was the first time that I had seen the film with Italian subtitles, and that was very strange because it was seeing, the English subtitles of the Urdu dialogue and then the Italian subtitles of the English subtitles. And so I was worried that, there would be things that are lost in translation or the audience wouldn't understand it, but it was really heartening that the timing was spot on to how other audiences had experienced the movie, and they really enjoyed it and appreciated it. And I had also never been to Europe before.
Oh, wow.
And getting to see an international audience experience the movie was really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. So what is one big thing you want people to take away when they do check out the film?
I hope they can find some compassion for this character and extend that compassion to young women in their life. I think that this transition period in a young woman's life is very tumultuous, and sometimes as a culture we diminish the experiences of teenagers and teenage women as being trivial or not important, and I think the formation of a strong self-identity and gaining autonomy for young women is really important. It's important for their growth and for what they do as adults. And we need to be better about that and sort of understand that they are full human beings and their problems are not trivial. It is really critical that we sort of see people with greater compassion and extend some of that to them if we can.
Oh, I'm really glad you got to tell the story. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Check it out. When's the big day? December 6th?
It is December 6th on Apple TV Plus.
There you go. That's Minhal. I'm DJ. See you next time here on The Sit Down.